On this Monday night, the RCMP's damning accusations against India's government.
The evidence brought to light by the RCMP cannot be ignored.
The dozens of alleged violent crimes committed in Canada.
For us as Sikhs, that's not a surprise.
The targets and India's tit-for-tat response. Israel's new deadly strikes on hospital grounds in central Gaza. And on a Christian village in Lebanon. Plus, Israel's growing calls for UN peacekeepers to leave Lebanon. And NHL player Nazem Kadri on stick-handling hate.
It was a lot of adversity, especially as a young kid.
How racism powered him forward at the rink.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The RCMP is warning tonight of violence and other criminal activities in this country allegedly linked to agents of the Indian government.
And as I mentioned earlier, what we're seeing is intimidation, harassment, extortion, coercion.
What I can tell you is that we've seen a number of criminal organizations that have been involved in the various criminal activity. It is extremely concerning.
We will never tolerate the involvement of a foreign government threatening and killing Canadian citizens on Canadian soil, a deeply unacceptable violation of Canada's sovereignty and of international law.
Now Canada is kicking out 6 Indian diplomats, including the High Commissioner, all of whom the PM said are agents of interest in the criminal activity. We have new details and analysis tonight on who's involved and what it all means, beginning with Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa.
It was a Thanksgiving Day stunner from the RCMP.
The team has learned a significant amount of information about the breadth and depth of criminal activity orchestrated by agents of the Government of India.
Commissioner Mike Duhem outlining allegations that agents of the Indian government have been involved with homicides, extortions, intimidation, and coercion of people in Canada. Also alleging the Indian government has interfered in Canadian democratic processes, and diplomats posted in Canada collected information about Canadian citizens and allegedly passed it on to the Indian government.
That is, without a doubt, a contravention of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, but also it goes against Canada's values as a society.
The RCMP attempted to meet with their Indian counterparts to discuss the allegations, but that meeting was rejected. Senior government officials in the RCMP eventually spoke with top Indian government officials yesterday, but
the outcome of that meeting was not what we had hoped,
leading the Prime Minister to expel 6 Indian diplomats, including the High Commissioner.
Canada fully respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of India, and we expect the Indian government to do the same for Canada.
The RCMP say they'd asked to have diplomatic immunity dropped with some of the expelled diplomats so they could be questioned, but that request was rejected. India responding in kind, expelling 6 Canadian diplomats, calling the allegations preposterous imputations.
Canada has provided credible, irrefutable evidence of ties between agents of the Government of India and a murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil.
A reference to the killing of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar last year in BC. The latest allegations involve at least 13 people who received personal warnings from the RCMP. Some who support the Khalistani separatist movement, others who were simply rivals of the Indian government.
The Government of India made a fundamental error in thinking that they could engage in supporting criminal activity.
The RCMP say 8 individuals have been arrested in relation to murders and 22 people charged in connection with extortions, some of whom have connections to the Indian government. But the Mounties won't say the number of homicides in total that Indian government agents are alleged to have been involved with. Neetu?
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks for that, Mackenzie. We're hearing tonight from one of those 13 people RCMP warned over threats to their safety. His name is Maninder Singh, and he's a pro-independence Sikh activist in Canada. He says he's received multiple RCMP warnings of imminent threat of assassination over the last 2 years. He's pushing for a public inquiry focused solely on India's foreign interference in Canada.
We have law enforcement agencies in the country that have no skin in the game to actually gain anything, and they're coming out and making these revelations, which I think there's nowhere to run for India, but they're still going to. And that's the nature of their regime, is never to be accountable to anyone.
And the World Sikh Organization says it welcomes Canada's declaration of India as a significant public safety risk, but says the RCMP's revelations don't come as a surprise to many in the Sikh community.
This is definitely not a surprise to us. It's really a revelation for the Canadian public. For us, it's 4 decades of foreign interference. All of us that speak about Sikh issues in the public face threats from India. It's across the board.
He says India needs to be held accountable and there needs to be stronger vetting for future Indian diplomats coming to Canada. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson has been looking deeper into the RCMP's investigation. Mercedes, what more have you learned about their findings and how much involvement is allegedly coming from the Indian government?
Neithu, Global News has learned that agents working out of India's High Commission in Ottawa and Indian consulates in Vancouver and Toronto were behind dozens of violent crimes across Canada that targeted opponents of the Modi government. On paper, these individuals appeared to hold diplomatic and consular positions, but Global News has learned that these Indian agents, in fact, played key roles in a wave of shootings, murders, threats, arson, and extortions in Canada. Now, I can tell you that this is coming from senior national security sources. And Neithu, I want to take a step back here to walk you through the details of what the network that the RCMP discovered in Canada looked like. This information has been provided to me by a senior national security source with direct knowledge of the situation, and that person has been authorized to speak with me on this matter. So this is information we are being given very directly from someone who knows. The RCMP uncovered a sophisticated network that spanned the country and all the way across the ocean to India. It basically has 3 parts. There's one leg that is information gathering and surveillance. There's sort of a top of a table, which is the decision makers who determine what to do with that information. And then over here, you have this 3rd leg, which is action being carried out and direct threats. So let me take you through what this kind of looks like. You have a situation where you are in some cases having inducements on community members, which could be an advantage on something they would like them to do, a carrot that's offered, or a stick. You better tell us something or else, to gather information. That information is then fed back to others in Canada and in India who decide what to do with it. And that leads to leg number 3, which can be at best intimidation or threats or coercion, and at worst it can be violent criminal activities, my source says, including several murders. So Neithu, this is sort of a very significant and sophisticated and direct connection. Lots of countries spy. That's not uncommon. But what's extraordinary here is the information being used to target enemies of the Modi regime here in Canada. And they were doing that, it's alleged by this national security source, by essentially going back to a criminal gang in India known as the Bishnoi gang. And this was actually raised in the RCMP press conference as well. And they would then be contracted to carry out some of these violent criminal acts in Canada, like shooting up people's houses or murders, any of that kind of stuff. So this was essentially, in some case, at best crime for hire, and in other cases, paid hits for murders.
Mercedes, let's talk about the RCMP's timing here. Why did the Mounties decide to make all of this public today?
I think there's some suspicion around this because Mr. Trudeau is, of course, under question by his own caucus about his leadership. But this senior national security source who was authorized to speak with me insisted that this was the decision of the RCMP and Canadian intelligence to go ahead. Because, number one, they were starting to see articles coming out in the Indian media attacking Canada after they had attempted to have their concerns addressed. Number two, they say that they had imminent concerns about violence being carried out in Canada. And that was why they made the decision to carry out this very unusual Thanksgiving Day presser. And number three, they wanted to send the message that as long as India, they say, is carrying out these kinds of acts on Canadian soil, Canada can't help India in terms of other forms of violent extremism, especially related to Khalistani separatism, something that the Indian government, as we know, is very concerned about. Aitou?
Okay, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Thanks for that, Mercedes. With last year's high-profile killing of BC Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar among the crimes being linked to India's government, British Columbia's premier, who's running for re-election, also remarked on today's findings.
British Columbia will continue to ensure that our police have all of the resources they need to get to the bottom of this and hold those involved accountable. We will not let any foreign government divide us.
Premier David Eby says he has spoken with the Deputy Prime Minister and Canada's Public Safety Minister regarding the investigations. He also says he remains profoundly concerned for the well-being of BC's Sikh community. He pleaded with anyone who has any information about criminal activity to immediately contact police. And you can read more about the violent crimes across Canada linked to India's government on our website, globalnews.ca. In the Middle East, deadly attacks in Gaza overnight killed and injured dozens of Palestinians, and a warning, some of the images are disturbing. An Israeli airstrike hit tents inside a central Gaza hospital where medics say 1 million people were sheltering. At least 4 people are known to have died. Video of the fire appears to show at least one person on a bed being burned alive. Israel says it struck militants operating from a command center inside the compound, accusing Hamas of using civilian facilities. In northern Gaza, at least 10 people were killed by Israeli artillery fire at a food distribution center at Jabalia refugee camp as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu examines a plan to cut off aid to the northern region to starve out Hamas militants, a plan which could trap hundreds of thousands of Palestinians without food or water. The exchange of airstrikes between Hezbollah and Israel continues to escalate across the Lebanese-Israeli border. The Lebanese Red Cross says at least 21 people were killed in a strike in northern Lebanon, part of the country's Christian heartland and away from Hezbollah strongholds in the south and east. Redmond Shannon reports.
The village of Aitou in Lebanon's north. Unlike many of the Israeli airstrikes in recent weeks, this is not a Shia Muslim area where Hezbollah has stronger support, but a majority Christian region. The village's mayor told Reuters news agency the house targeted in the deadly attack was being rented to families displaced by the conflict. Hezbollah rockets landed in Israel on Monday too. A day that saw funerals begin for 4 19-year-old Israeli soldiers killed in a Hezbollah drone strike the day before. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the military base where the drones hit. He said Israel is fighting against Iran's axis of evil and that it will continue to hit Hezbollah in all parts of Lebanon. Just as in Gaza, Israel's methods of war are being criticised, not least its attacks on the United Nations UNIFIL peacekeeping force in Lebanon, which have left several UN troops injured.
Many European members are participating in this mission. Their work is very important. It's completely unacceptable.
We regret any harm done to UNIFIL personnel.
On Monday, Israel's energy minister echoed Netanyahu's calls for UNIFIL to leave southern Lebanon. He called the force useless. UNIFIL's mandate has been to help keep Hezbollah and Israel out of that part of Lebanon since the 2006 war.
We're now in the bunker that we found.
Israel released this video claiming to show a Hezbollah bunker near the Lebanon-Israel border, from where it alleges cross-border attacks were being planned. Israel insists it will return residents to its north who fled a year ago. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Critics sound the alarm about Donald Trump. Coming up, why they're comparing the Republican candidate to authoritarians. There is an unusual story coming out of North Carolina in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Recovery efforts there have hit a snag because of violent threats. According to the Washington Post, U.S. National Guard troops have apparently encountered an armed militia there who were targeting federal aid workers. The threat forced a temporary pause in operations, and some workers had to relocate. Such threats are being fueled by rampant disinformation, much of it also being spread by former President Donald Trump. Weeks before the election, the Republican candidate is also using increasingly authoritarian language on the campaign trail. That includes threatening to use the U.S. military against his political opponents. As Jackson Proskow explains, there are worries Trump could turn it into action if reelected.
It's the enemy from within, all the scum that we have to deal with that hate our country. That's a bigger enemy than China and Russia.
3 weeks before Election Day, and Donald Trump has declared the country's biggest problem to be Americans who don't support him. Going even further in an interview with Fox News.
We have some sick people, radical left lunatics, and I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
That Trump would suggest using the military against his own citizens is nothing new. As president, he threatened to use troops to quell the nationwide protests for racial justice in the summer of 2020.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
This time, Trump is running explicitly on a platform of vengeance, while demonizing immigrants and vowing mass deportations, also at the hands of the military.
Those people have to be taken out.
The language echoes authoritarians throughout history. Trump's opponents fear it's not just a threat.
I think people really need to look very carefully at what Donald Trump will do if he were ever to be in the Oval Office again.
In a neck-and-neck presidential race, the political strategy is questionable.
He's focused more on turning out the base than convincing people in the middle, and he thinks that that's the way to win.
Kamala Harris's campaign is also running on Trump's words.
Donald Trump is a danger to our troops and our democracy.
The former president hardly seems deterred, showing no signs of moderating his message to quell the fear he continues to stoke. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Sean Diddy Combs is facing a new wave of lawsuits accusing him of sexually assaulting women, men, and a minor. At least 6 lawsuits were filed today, 2 by women and 4 by men. One alleges Combs sexually assaulted him when he was 16. The accusers are part of what their lawyers say is a group of more than 100 alleged victims in the process of taking legal action. Combs has already pleaded not guilty to racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking charges. To Jupiter's moon. Ahead, what NASA hopes to find out on a $5 billion odyssey.
And liftoff of Falcon Heavy with Europa Clipper.
NASA's Europa Clipper has launched its mission to explore its namesake, Jupiter's moon Europa. Clipper will investigate whether life could exist on Jupiter's moon. Scientists believe there is a deep body of water underneath the layer of ice that covers Europa, noting where there is water, there could be life. Europa Clipper won't reach the moon until April of 2030. Canadian singer The Weeknd is rocketing to new heights on the world's top music streaming platform. That is Blinding Lights, holding strong as Spotify's most popular song. It has more than 4.5 billion streams on the platform. Well, the singer now has 19 other songs with more than 1 billion streams. The Weeknd is the first artist to have 20 individual tracks exceed that milestone. Deflecting racism and scoring goals. Next, NHL player Nazem Kadri's journey to center ice. NHL player Nazem Kadri is sharing his experiences in the league in a new memoir. The former Maple Leaf, now a Calgary Flame, has broken barriers. As the highest drafted Muslim player in the NHL and the first person to bring the Stanley Cup home to visit a mosque, Kadri sat down with our Heather Urex West to talk about why he wants to share his story now.
Congratulations on your book. It's called Dreamer, My Life on the Edge. Why write the book now? You're not done your playing career, you're not retired yet. Why was this the time to tell your story?
You know, to be honest with you, I just felt like it was a chance to put my thoughts to the paper, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out.
Kadri grew up in London, Ontario, quickly falling in love with hockey, the London Knights, and demonstrating amazing skill on the ice. But from his first days playing competitively, he knew his path was different. His father had immigrated to Canada from Lebanon as a boy, so Kadri often stood out.
So I learned that you're not the only Nazem Kadri. That was your grandfather's name. He came to Canada from Lebanon in the 60s. You write very proudly about your Lebanese heritage, but you also talk about some of the racism that you faced starting at the age of 10. And then you write that you use that to fuel you. So how did you get to that point where you could turn something that was traumatic to something positive?
It was a lot of adversity, especially as a young kid. You don't quite understand how to navigate that subject particularly, so I had to lean on my family lots. And you know, I was always a guy that, you know, wanted to prove the doubters wrong, and that was something that you know, I found motivation out of.
Because Kadri knows he is far from alone in facing this kind of hate. Growing up, he says there weren't any other Muslim faces in hockey to look up to. So when he realized his ultimate hockey dream, winning the Stanley Cup, he knew he wanted to share his win with the Muslim community in his hometown, which was also going through a lot.
There's a really beautiful part of the book where you talk about bringing the Stanley Cup to the mosque in your hometown and sharing some moments with the little boy from the Afzal family, who of course went through that tragedy in 2021 when a man motivated by hate mowed down that family, killing parents, a grandmother, and a sibling. What was that like for you as a father to share those moments with that little boy that day?
It was special for me. Obviously a very traumatic and tragic situation. That was one of my favorite moments of bringing the Stanley Cup to my hometown, was just being in a private room with these kids and, you know, having the Stanley Cup on the table, and you could just tell how mesmerized they were. And
you saw yourself in those kids?
Absolutely.
Which comes back to why Nazem Kadri says he wrote this book now, before his playing time is up, for a new generation who can see themselves in his story, ready to be dreamers themselves. Heather Urix, West Global News, Calgary.
An inspiration to many. That is Global National for this Monday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is downtown Saskatoon. We love seeing your Canada. Please email it to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks so much for watching. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Happy Thanksgiving and have a great night.